Go check out the excellent collection of t-shirts available at popthreads.com and use our discount code Simpsons at checkout to save 15% on your order. It helps out our show and it saves you a little bit of dough. Thank you again for listening to the Best Darn Diddly Review Show, and thank you for supporting our sponsor, popthreads.com. Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to the Best Darn Diddly Review Show. This is a weekly podcast for anyone who loves The Simpsons or ever has loved The Simpsons, hosted by two dudes that grew up on The Simpsons. My name is Miles, better known as MrMostDaysOff, and today we've got a little bit different of a show for you. We're talking about the episode So It's Come to This, a Simpsons Clip Show. But even if this show's a little wacky, I'm still gonna have my partner in crime by my side, your co-host with the most, Richie theWizKid. How are you today, Rich?
If it's gonna be a little wacky, I might as well stay along for the ride. I actually enjoyed this episode a lot more than I thought I was going to. When I saw this one was coming up, I was a little hesitant at first, and I think I remember certain things, and then realized I was thinking of the wrong clip show at first. But this show had a lot more to it than I thought it would. But you know we're going to get into that. For now, I'll throw it back to you. The man, the myth, the man who loses 5% of his brain every week. It's Miles.
Why that funny?
Why laughing?
Yeah, honestly, I'll fess up. Completely thought this was a different episode. Like, I in my mind, I was remembering an entirely different episode, one that had, at the commercial breaks, they sent you away with bits of trivia. And if I remember correctly, even some of the so-called trivia they gave was incorrect, which made me think that with this being the April Fool's episode, that was another sign that that's what we were getting. But no, this was a completely different episode. I remember it well, if nothing else, for the meme of the soda can shaking. That was like a big... That image was very much in my brain from a kid, like being the most epic of all April Fool's pranks, and I loved April Fool's jokes, so...
April Fool!
So, yeah, I was thinking this was a completely different episode, and
I thought it was the Troy McClure one, the 157th or 257th, whatever the hell it is.
I did think that's what it was. You are absolutely right.
I knew it wasn't that one yet, because this is way too early in the series for that, but it's easy to confuse parts of the clip shows together, because essentially they're the same storyline, more so or less. So I just forgot what clips played in this one, and how it had an actual new story roped into it.
Well, and I have to say that they did a pretty good job of making it seem like a fresh episode, at least in the first act especially, because, for one, they didn't actually get into the clips until later into the episode. So the first third of this episode was, in fact, all new footage. But even with the way they presented the clips, it did get a little bit cheesy at times, but it's like they steered into the cheese, and they almost played fun or poked fun at themselves through some of these cutscenes that they'd used to propel the storyline that essentially was really just gimmicked to get us the audience ready to view more clips.
It was like they broke the fourth wall on themselves, pretty much.
Like I said at the top of the show, the episode we're reviewing today is So It's Come to This, a Simpsons Clip Show that debuted on April 1st, and that date is not lost on the plot of this episode, April 1st, 1993. The chalkboard gag on this one is no one is interested in my underpants, so I guess Bart and I don't have that much in common.
Happens to the best of us.
And then the couch gag is the head swap, which was actually, I was surprised from the get-go because I was expecting the big circus extended one like we've talked about, and then they just did one that they've already done before. This was also a rehashed couch gag, which I guess makes sense for a clip show.
Yes, it does.
They just came in with each other's heads and then ended up trading, and it finally ended with Maggie grabbing her pacifier back from her father's mouth, I believe.
Maggie reaches for the pacifier from her father's mouth. You sounded too official there. His name is Homer, Miles. Homer.
That's the name of my baloney, actually. Weird.
It's Homer.
This episode starts out, like I said, it's April 1st, so it's April Fool's Day, and Homer is already dropping the pranks on Bart.
Let's drop the beat.
This one's actually kind of mean, dude. Homer duct tapes Bart's eyes closed so that when Bart wakes up and opens his eyes, he literally thinks he's gone blind.
And he doesn't even wait to start laughing at Bart either. He's right on top of it.
Well,
I wonder how long he was waiting out there.
And is like, ha ha, April Fools.
He sounded very Nelson-like. He did a full-on.
Yeah, he really did. You know, I never had this done to me as an April Fool's prank. For one, I hope I would wake up when somebody was adding duct tape to my face, but maybe not. However, I do remember one time I was visiting family, and it was up in, like, Illinois, and I'd never been there. It was during the fall, and I was allergic to something, so this is kind of gross, but long story short, I have got, like, all sorts of mucus going on, including, you know, that really gross shit that'll, like, come out of your eye socket sometimes, like what the crusty shit you get when you wake up in the morning?
Yeah.
I got that, like, to the extreme, and I don't know how old I was. It had to have been somewhere in, like, the 6 to 8 range, so... Long story short, I wake up and my eyes are crusted shut. I cannot open them, and I literally thought I was blind for, like, I don't know however long it lasted until I was able to splash water on my face and get my eyes open. But essentially, that was the first time that had ever happened to me, and it scared the shit out of me. I thought I had gone blind at, like, age 6 or 8.
I think we all had that moment at least, like, 3 times in our young lives.
Really? I thought I was alone. Are there
No.
more of us in this?
Yeah, that happened to me multiple times when I was younger.
I thought this was like some traumatic experience that I was alone for. I didn't realize that there was dozens of us.
It's just a normal experience, man.
I've never heard of anybody else having
eyes?
that. No, but like to the point where I couldn't open them. That
happened to me on more than one occasion.
Interesting.
Speaking of Krusty, who's not in this episode at all.
I guess that I'm not alone here, but it scared the piss out of me, so I can imagine it scared the absolute piss out of Bart when he was able to open his eyes and he couldn't see anything, but again, he quickly realized that he was in fact just being pranked. He then gets downstairs to get himself some milk, and Homer's yet again there to laugh at him as Bart chokes on what we find out to be at least 6-month-old milk that Homer has been keeping by the radiator. Ugh.
See, I would assume that Bart would be the last one to wake up, so that means everyone else opened the fridge and didn't grab this milk, or Homer just literally waited to the last minute before he put it in there.
I got the impression he was, like, waiting for Bart specifically.
Well, he was, but I'm just saying, like, it seems almost too meticulous for Homer.
Well, he's committed to his pranks, what can we say? But after the milk incident, I actually really love this little interaction between Bart and Homer. Bart's angry because he's just been pranked twice back to back, so he yells out, "You're going down, Homer. I'm going to fool you."
You talk better than you fool.
I'll fool you up real nice.
You couldn't fool your mother on the foolingest day of your life if you had an electrified fooling machine.
And of course, speaking of Marge, she's actually just really annoyed because she's having to clean out this, like, solidified milk from the bottom of this
yellow
jug. Yeah, it's gross. This actually makes Lisa remember that, like many holidays, such as Halloween and Christmas, April Fool's Day is actually just stolen by the Christians from the pagans.
Lisa the know-it-all.
Essentially, April Fool's Day was pagans' New Year, and they have this great little sketch with Homer and the Simpsons clan, like, as pagans back in the 1100 AD or something. They're chanting blood for Baal. So, like, blood for their god, basically, is what they're saying. And then Ned and the Flanderses are there laughing and mocking the Simpsons, saying, "Oh, New Year's was actually 3 months ago, but we went ahead and brought you some ram's blood for your silly godless holiday." Only, there was no ram's blood. This was, in fact, the first April Fool's Day's prank. The Christians were mocking the pagans.
And they use a classic prank, too.
Yeah, in this case, mocking them with little spring snakes that jumped out of their blood jar. But the Simpsons got the last laugh. After all, they tied the Flanders to a stake, put them around the fire, and started chanting, "Now who's laughing? Now who's laughing?"
And then Homer comes back to the president and says, "And that's the story of April Fool's Day."
Dad, I was telling that story.
Oh, right.
On to the Frying Dutchman, which is also celebrating the holiday as we see the sea captain peering through his looking glass at his shipment of fresh fish, which are actually frozen in a box. Nonetheless, he takes the looking glass down and his crew has gotten him with the classic prank of putting the shoe polish around the edge, and he got a black ring around his eye. Sea Captain yells at his crew saying it's going to be hair nets for all of them. they're all really bummed about that.
Which means they don't usually use hair nets. How's Bart going to get back at Homer for all these classic pranks, though?
And that's really what's driving this episode so far, is Bart has vowed revenge. He just has to figure out what Homer's weakness could be so that he can get an epic prank off. And just then, as he's observing Homer, Homer goes to the fridge and declares loudly as he drinks an ice-cold beer, "Ah, beer, my one and only weakness."
My Achilles heel, if you will. I love how he says, "if you will," after that. Like, so blatantly pointing it out to Bart.
And Bart does take notice. He says, "Beer! Beer's the cheese! But how can I use it against him?"
And when Homer has the beer in his hand, he accidentally drops it. And it gets shook up a little bit. And when he opens it, it sprays him in the face, and he says, "Good thing it wasn't shaken up more than it was. I would have looked quite the fool. An April Fool, as it were."
And Bart just starts to laugh. He's figured out what his trap is going to be.
Good thinking, Bart. You found one weakness for Homer that everybody knew about for the entirety of the show.
Took him a while. But he actually takes his last can of beer to a paint shop and puts it on one of the old-time paint mixers that just shakes the shit out of it. The little teenage employee comes up and lets him know that that machine is actually for paint customers only, but Bart distracts him by letting the teenager know that Stridex is passing out free wipes out in the parking lot.
And this is the voice of the pimply-faced kid, who is kind of a renaissance man if you think about it. He works in pretty much every establishment in Springfield at some point.
I love how he declares it's going to be a pizza face's paradise. But yes, he does do a lot of jobs. You're totally right. Either way, Bart was able to get the upper hand. He gets the beer shaken up, and he sets the trap. He puts it in the fridge, and he watches Homer as he eats pretzels on the couch. It'll only be a matter of time before the thirst kicks in. And the thirst
only a
does
matter of
kick in.
science.
And Homer does get thirsty. In fact, he's watching Bumblebee Man, and he starts to declare, "Oh, so thirsty. What you gonna do?" And he continues to watch TV.
He almost has that moment of revenge, and then it's stricken from him by Homer yet again.
So Bart knows that if he is going to get this prank off, he is going to have to turn up the heat. So he literally turns up the heat to get Homer sweating so that he'll want to go get a cold beer. And it still doesn't work. I love what actually sets Homer off is a beer commercial actually warning against the dangers of alcohol, including things like rectal cancer.
The following is a public service announcement. Excessive alcohol consumption can cause liver damage and cancer of the rectum. Beer.
So, funny little fact about this sequence is this was the only thing in the episode that caught the censor's eyes. And at first they said that they would not allow them to say the bit about rectal cancer, but they stood by the fact that that was actually a known side effect of excessive alcohol consumption. So the censors made them prove that in writing. Now, they talked about this on the commentary, how it seems like the only time censors really had problems with these things was when jokes were directly targeted at beer companies, and they suspect that's because of the sponsorship deals that were in place. So what ended up allowing this joke to go through was they changed it from the beer commercial originally said that beer was known to cause those side effects, and the actual aired show, which we watched, was alcohol is known to cause those side effects. So even that subtle little change takes the target off of the beer companies and keeps their sponsors happy.
I mean, that proves that they're right then, though, because they were like, "No, we have a problem with the fact that you're talking about rectal cancer." But when I change one word to make it a more broad statement, all of a sudden the rectal cancer is meaningless.
Well, and they also pointed out that Homer still declares at the end, beer.
Yeah, it's like their little backhanded slap in the face, making them change it.
This is what actually puts Homer over the edge, though. This warning against alcohol makes Homer want that last can of alcohol, and Bart is stoked. He is ready to watch his dad be humiliated. He starts to declare right as Homer pops the tab, "April Fools!
He literally doesn't even get to say fools in it. He literally goes, April Fool!
And the whole house explodes, like in a it looked like a bomb went off in the kitchen.
Yes, well, technically it did, but you know. I like the Lou and Wiggum are outside in the cop car. And Lou's like, that sounded like an explosion at the old Simpsons place.
And at first, Wiggum's like, that's 2 blocks away.
Forget it, that's 2 blocks away.
But then Lou points out, it looks like there's beer shooting through the chimney.
I'm proceeding on foot, calling a code 8.
We are gonna need pretzels. I repeat, we need pretzels.
Which Homer just ate all of.
And just a little feather in the cap here is the image of Wiggum running down the street with his tongue wagging out the side of his mouth. And he looks like an excited child. He looks like Ralph did like after getting the Valentine's Day last week or a couple weeks ago. He's just got this glimmer in his eye of this free beer.
I'm just glad that, you know, a few episodes back, they finally got Wiggum and Ralph and have their characters cemented on who they are. So, like, now we're getting the iconic moments from them.
It opens up a lot of possibilities for their characters when they actually have more of a foundation, and they build upon it really nicely here. After our interaction with Springfield's finest, we move on to the Springfield Hospital, where Dr. Hibbert has some bad news for Marge. He tells her that her husband is dead, right in front of the children, and Marge starts to cry.
April Fools, but he might never walk again.
It's such a terrible joke. Like I said, right in front of the kids, too, so it makes it even worse. The doors into Homer's room open, and we see he is pushing himself in a wheelchair with a mop, singing Row, Row, Row Your Boat.
And Marge is genuinely happy to see that he looks okay for the most part, too, so... Actually, I don't know why I really like the moment where they embrace each other right there, because they look genuinely happy.
It's kind of sweet. It is. I can see your point, especially after a traumatic episode like this one. I think a lot of it has to do, too, with the fact that The Simpsons has so much heart to it that even though they're animated, we actually really do get a connection with these characters in a weird way.
Well, speaking of connections, I noticed a familiar face in the little scene here with Homer and one of the other doctors. It's almost like the writers and animators reused old footage almost, even though they looked new, of a guy that was previously at a different job in the hospital, and they just wanted to fill some time, maybe. I don't know.
The doctor that you're speaking of declares, after showing Marge and the kids Homer's x-rays, especially his skull x-rays, that the dark shadows that we see are all from head injuries. And then we get our first sequence of flashbacks that just go through several episodes worth of Homer taking it to the noggin.
We've brought up numerous times before our Homer is unbreakable theory. And what I like about this is if Homer's a superhero that's unbreakable physically, this shows that his kryptonite, so to speak, is that internally, every injury he suffers actually affects him internally, which will also come into play in the Smashing Pumpkins episode down the road. So while Homer externally is unbreakable, internally he has suffered every major trauma possible.
So I was going to ask you about that, since you are such a fan of the unbreakable theory, which there is definitely some credence that goes into it, not as much as Magical Maggie in my opinion, but I don't quite understand how you're justifying this. Like, if Homer is unbreakable, why is he broken in this episode?
He's broken internally, though. It's like it's inside of him. It's not externally. Like, his head isn't broken. He's suffering, like, internal bleeding and things like that.
Okay, so he just has to recover from internal injuries before he can progress forward.
Yeah,
He's had too many.
He recovers
external.
quickly on the outside, but on the inside, he actually suffers all these things.
Honestly, if anything, you'd want that to be the other way around.
Oh, absolutely. But I'm just saying that is what Homer is. And I also wrote a note to point out that this episode, being a clip show, is a little bit different. And it almost has a Treehouse of Horror aspect, where there's continuity issues with this episode that you won't get in any other episode. Like we'll get into in a little while. Mr. Burns remembers every interaction with Homer in this episode, which he never does in any other episode. So that's why I wrote, like, this kind of has a Treehouse of Horror thing to it, where to fit the story, they have to change certain aspects.
They talk about that very fact in the commentary as well, that they do consider these episodes when they're writing them. They think a lot more of them as they would a Treehouse of Horror than they do a standard Simpsons episode. So very astute of you, sir.
Thank you very much. And I'm out.
And on a high note. After the doctor reveals the x-rays, we go into that flashback sequence, and we see a couple of times Homer has had, or may have had, a head injury. There's 2 instances where he's hit with a baseball, then we see a circular saw fall off a shelf onto his head. We also see him passed out between the doors of the Quickie Mart, and finally, Maggie coming at him with a hammer.
And I just want to point out that this is me and no help from a guidebook whatsoever that I'm totally reading from right now. But those are the episodes: Life in the Fast Lane, Homer at the Bat, 2 instances from Lisa's Pony, and then 1 from Itchy, Scratchy, and Marge.
Nice. Back in present time, the doctor is also worried because in addition to the head injuries, Homer also has a very erratic heartbeat. That's when we flash back all the way to season 1's No Disgrace Like Home, where the family, trying to use it as a counseling method, are actually just shocking the shit out of each other with electrodes in Dr. Marvin's office.
I'm Dr. Marvin Monroe. Still a really funny scene, even though we're 3 seasons down the road.
It's a great scene, and also want to point out this is the one that they play in Die Hard 2, actually. But one other thing to note about this little sequence is there is a lot of difference that you could very clearly see between the animation style of Season 4 versus Season 1 when they'd flash back and forth between the two. It wasn't jarring like it would be with like the Tracy Ullman shorts, but you could definitely see how much in just these 4 seasons these characters have really cleaned up.
Couldn't agree more, man. It's very easy to see the difference.
Back in present time again, the doctor asks Marge if she has any idea what could account for the head injuries or the erratic heartbeat. And Marge says, no. Unless you count the time that he fell down the Springfield Gorge. And of course, we flash back to all the way, I believe that was in season 2, Bart the Daredevil, where Homer jumped over, or attempted to jump over, the Springfield Gorge in Bart's place. What I really like about this sequence, though, is the animators actually added new animation to it. If you recall, the first time we watched this sequence, in the Bart the Daredevil episode, Homer fell down the second time and we could only actually hear it, and all we saw were the kids looking over the cliff. So all of the sequence where Homer was already wrapped up and had his arms cinched down, which made it even worse to watch, mind you. All of that was actually fresh animation made for this show. So the writers or the animators, I should say, weren't being completely lazy.
And it is much funnier when you get to see it both times.
It really is. It was really, like I said, though, it's almost harder to watch the second time because his arms are tied down. So, like, every impact you could see where he would be better off if he could brace himself, but can't.
You gotta keep those bones in place, man.
But the doctor says that doesn't really explain what he's seeing on the charts, but just then Marge realizes what you were talking about earlier. Hey, you look familiar. Have I seen you before? And we flash back to the episode Dog of Death, where the Simpsons had to pay for an expensive surgery, and it turns out that this doctor was actually the vet the whole time. And for an extra $20, he will both give Homer a tick bath and spay him.
Which Bart is more than willing to pay for on the spot.
Hey man, shop around. That deal can't be beat.
We've gotten our first full influx of clips here in the last few minutes. And I just wanted to say, we talked about this at the top of the show here. I really actually enjoyed the way they did the clips for the most part in the show. Like, when you know it's going to be a clip show, a lot of times when you're younger, or even here recently, you skip watching the episode, but since we're actually reviewing it, I have to say, I really enjoyed the way they put this one together. Like, it made sense to me, but they had, like, smart ways of going about it with the April Fool's storyline. And I don't know what it was about it. I guess I just expected to really not like this episode. But I found myself laughing a lot up to this point, at least.
They did a really good job, and again, you have to keep using that caveat for a clip show, but at the same time, so far, we've actually had very few clips. I think we've only had maybe 8 total clips throughout this half of the show, and a lot of new footage. And they're getting, throughout the episode, it'll get more and more. We're going to get into a lot more setups here shortly, but they do start to get cheekier and cheekier about it as they start to poke more and more fun at themselves for using this concept.
But the way they've been going about it up to this point, it's almost like they make you feel like you're part of an inside joke. Like, especially with him asking Marge, is there anything that could have caused Homer to be this way? And she's like, no, except for this one time. And it's just like, you're like, I was there, I saw that happen, and it's so funny. So it's like I said, it's like you're part of an inside joke almost. Before we continue on with some more of these flashbacks, I just can't help but thinking, because again, it is a clip show, is this something where the writers and the animators needed a break? Were they running low on episodes and need another episode? I'm sure there had to be something in the commentary that talks about this, but it just seems, you always assume a clip show is something that's forced a little bit.
They did talk a lot about this in the commentary, you're absolutely right. And you're also spot on about it being they're overworked is what's really happening at this point, because throughout seasons 2 and 3 of the show, the animators and the writers were working upwards of 80 hours per week when they were doing 20. That was when they were doing 24 episodes a season. So Al Jean and Mike Reiss, the showrunners of season 4, actually went to James Brooks before the season started and said to him, hey man, we're going to start losing people. They just can't keep up with the demands of this workload that we're putting on them. So what can we do? And James Brooks was like, well, how many episodes can you do? And they essentially got to talking about it, and they came up with the idea. It was actually Jim Brooks' idea to do a clip show, and said, if you could do 22 episodes and one of them is a clip show, would that help? And they said that would be huge. That would make a huge impact, give everybody a little bit of a break. And that's actually how this came to be. However, while the animators and the writers were saying that they needed a break, everyone else, basically all of the brass, the money, the corporate side of things, were pushing for more and more episodes because Simpsons Mania was hot as can be at this time, and if they could fill their entire calendar up, they wanted to do that. It actually got to the point during negotiations, I believe it was Al Jean remembered specifically, was saying on the commentary that the studio at one point pitched to them the idea that they did an absurd number of episodes. It was like 30-something episodes.
Whoa.
But 4 of them per season would be clip shows. And
wow.
Fortunately, they were able to work it out to just doing the occasional clip show to give themselves a break and lowering the number of episodes, because that would have been just really, really outrageous.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. People would get fed up if there were 4 clip shows every year.
Yeah, absolutely. That's just overload, man. That's too many clips. I mean, it's a funny show, and I like revisiting the old episode. This was actually an enjoyable show to watch for a clip show, but one a season would be overkill, and I think that might be at most what we ever get. So this is the point in the episode where we're going to start getting more and more into these little setups, and it does become a little bit more contrived in a lot of ways, but it's still a lot of fun. We're going to talk about it, but first, let's take a quick break and hear from our Podern family.
Do you ever wonder what would happen if you had a robot select 3 random elements and then gave those elements to pretend entrepreneurs, and then those pretend entrepreneurs use those things to inspire amazing pitches? Hi, I'm Derek, host of The Wild Pitch, and I'll tell you what would happen. You get an absurdist Shark Tank-style show called The Wild Pitch. New episodes every Wednesday on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Podbean, wherever podcasts are found.
So at this point in the episode, we've got Homer in the hospital. He has suffered what Richie believes are purely internal injuries because he's unbreakable on the outside only, which is like almost a reverse superpower. But regardless, what we see next is Lisa's talking to her father, and he's worried that she won't think he's tough anymore. And Lisa says, no, Dad, remember when you got lost in the woods?
This was the only clip that I had issue with, just because I felt like it went on a little too long.
They showed a lot of this clip. It was all from the episode Call of the Simpsons, all the way back from season 1. And they used this as a lot of filler in this part. And honestly, at this point in the episode, this is what we're going to get. It's just going to be present scene set up with going back to the flashback. So it kind of has lost a lot of its stride at this point. And really, in a lot of ways, this part of the episode does feel like filler in general.
But again, for me, it was just this one particular one because we're still going to get some scenes in the present with some other characters here. But this one just went on too long for me. I honestly saw myself tuning it out for a few seconds, which made me really mad at myself.
The next one was just a very strange entry, in my opinion, because they actually did a flashback to a Treehouse of Horror episode where the entire Simpsons family was getting abducted by aliens.
I guess they just didn't know where to go with this. Like, we need one more clip. Can we just throw something in here at random?
In some ways, I think this is almost a signal, because this is the part of the show I mentioned. It really starts to get quite a bit cheekier after this, where they start really poking fun at themselves. This almost, to me, seemed like the flipping the switch moment for that to occur. But, like the Call of the Simpsons flashback, I thought this one, too. I mean, it played out like the entire UFO scene. And it was just very strange and made this one feel even less like a normal episode of The Simpsons. What really goes over the line for a quote-unquote flashback episode is Bart just starts talking about a random episode of Itchy and Scratchy, where Scratchy got his eyeballs replaced with little bombs that for some reason worked his eyeballs up until the point that they exploded. I love when they get back to the present, Marge is like, "Why are you talking about that?"
It was an amusing episode of our lives. That was one of my favorite quotes of the episode, and that made me okay with what they did there.
This is where they start trying to toe that line, where they're still trying to make it Simpsons, even though they're very much recycling what they're doing at this point.
Hey, if it makes you laugh, then who cares, right?
True. I mean, at the end of the day, that's really what it's all about. It's not just the Simpsons family that cares about Homer, it's also his friends. Moe and Barney come to visit Homer in the hospital, and they do a whole little bit where, first of all, Moe offers Homer a beer, and it causes him to have, PTSD flashbacks to the explosion. He screams and says he never wants to see beer again. Barney can't bear to watch his friend live like this, so he decides he's going to smother him with a pillow.
And this is very One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest right here.
It is, yes. Just like a lot of times with The Simpsons, this was almost a shot-for-shot parody of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Barney pulling out the drinking fountain and throwing it through the window and then running out and running over the hill.
And then Moe poking out behind him. He really needs to find a girlfriend. My absolute favorite moment in this entire episode is the next scene between Homer and Marge. Marge is trying to console Homer, and Homer's worried. "Marge, what if I wind up a vegetable and just end up watching TV every day on the couch for the rest of my life? I'll never complete any of my important life's work."
Society's loss, I suppose. Marge doesn't always get the best lines, but this was delivered so perfectly. This is so funny.
And yet again, something you almost can't be mad at because they do such a good little joke here, but really it's a setup for more flashbacks, this time between Marge and Homer. Only, honestly, this is my biggest issue with this entire episode, because Marge is trying to make Homer feel better. She's talking about how even though their marriage has had rough times in the past, they've always made it through. But out of all of the times in their marriage that she could have picked, she picks the time that she almost cheated on Homer. How is that going to make you feel better?
It's not that she picked that moment. It just happened to be that episode. She picked the best moment of the episode, at least.
This was, of course, a flashback to Season 1's Life on the Fast Lane, where Marge took bowling lessons with Jacques, with a J sound, Emily.
Mimosa?
In the episode, really, Marge teetered on the idea of having an affair with Jacques. Cheating on Homer is what the impression that I think we all got from that episode, at least to some extent. And right at the very end, when she's driving to where we think she's going to go run off with Jacques, she makes that turn at the end to go to the power plant, and they spoof the movie An Officer and a Gentleman as Homer carries Marge to the car, and when the men ask, "Where should we tell the boss?" tell him, "I'm going to the backseat of my car with a woman I love, and I won't be back for 10 minutes.
See, you're still laughing, so the moment worked.
Great moment, but again, I don't think being reminded of the time your spouse almost cheated on you is the best way about going about cheering somebody up, is all I'm getting at.
Homer's suffering major brain trauma right now, so he doesn't even remember the instance of that.
He has suffered 5% brain loss. Well, not yet. We're getting there. Now is the moment that the doctors are trying to get Homer back on his feet. He's been in the hospital now for an undisclosed amount of time. They said he may never walk again, and it turns out the doctors seem that might be the conclusion they're coming to, because as hard as they're trying, they just cannot get Homer to stand up. Until they walk away, and what they were blocking is the motivation that Homer needs, because at the end of the hall, almost as if it were glowing angelically, a candy machine sings out to Homer.
Does it have chocolate in there?
You know, I don't know if the machine does, but his fantasy he has sure does, because we get yet another flashback, this time to Chocolate Land from the episode where the Germans took over the power plants.
Burns verkaufen der Kraftwerk.
And he runs around eating everything that's in chocolate, yet still gets really excited when he finds the chocolate shop selling half-price chocolate. That will never not be chocolate. Funny. So Homer has found the will to walk again, and it turns out it was chocolate. He stands up, he puts his quarter in the machine, he selects the chocolate bar, and it gets stuck on the way down.
Where did he pull the quarter from, by the way?
I had the same question. Where the fuck did he get that quarter?
He's in a hospital gown, for those who don't recall, and I don't know where this quarter comes from, but it works for the story, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we all know where he pulled the quarter from, but...
The cup of change that he keeps in his wheelchair, right? That's what you mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Wherever this quarter came from, he uses it to buy a chocolate bar. It gets stuck. It makes him enraged. He starts to beat the machine with full Homer strength. He is on his feet here.
That's because he's recovering already. He's unbreakable.
He's not unbreakable on the inside, at least, because he actually knocks the candy machine down. It tumbles on top of him. Fortunately, he's able to chomp down a few chocolate bars that fell through the broken glass before he passes out unconscious.
I like the shot here where actually the screen fades to black, but you can still hear him for a few moments. And according to my guidebook, The Simpsons, A Complete Guide to Our Favorite Family, the number of candy bars that fall directly into Homer's mouth as he lays pinned and injured underneath the candy machine is 10. That's a lot of candy.
That is a lot of chocolate.
The next visitor that Homer gets is one of my favorite scenes. The next two, honestly, both are, but another Simpsons relative comes to pay a visit to Homer in the hospital, with quite hilarious results. Abe Simpson's come to pay a visit to his son, and when he finds his son there, he says, "Poor Homer. The world wasn't meant for one as beautiful as yourself."
And then Homer starts to drool and kind of choke on his drool.
Kill it! Kill it!
Marge comes in and reassures Abe it's fine, he's just in a coma.
A coma? I go into comas all the... French toast, please.
Oh my goodness. Dude, Grandpa Simpson, all the characters just have all these great lines all the time, but he's absolutely one of them.
Well, then we also get the line with Grandpa and Lisa, where Lisa is asking Grandpa if comas are painful. And Grandpa says, "You relive long-lost summers. Kiss girls from high school. It's like one of those TV shows where they show a bunch of clips from old episodes."
And Bart immediately is like, yeah, okay. Anyways, I wonder what he's thinking right now.
Way to bring us back around, Bart. Keep us on track. That's usually not his job.
This next flashback's interesting because it's actually a dream sequence that he had also back in Lisa's Pony. There's a lot from
Popular
Lisa's
episode
Pony, actually.
today.
Yeah. It's where he was working all the time, so he wasn't getting enough sleep. And in this case, he falls asleep at the wheel, and he starts to go into this kind of trippy sequence.
Slumberland.
You may recall from our review on Lisa's Pony, I had mentioned that during that sequence when it originally aired, they actually used a song from the Beatles album Abbey Road. But during all reruns and all syndication, they actually had to replace the song, and that included this episode. This episode originally aired with the replacement song in it as opposed to the Beatles song in it.
Oh.
So that was a clip show of trivia from one of our former Best Darn Diddlies. So this is like a meta clip show now.
A clip show within a clip show. Abed would be proud. Or really upset since it's a clip show.
Yeah, clip shows. Damn it.
Miles and Richie on the clip show.
Homer has yet another visitor, and one you talked about earlier that kind of breaks the Simpsons universe a little bit, or breaks the rules of it. Mr. Burns comes in, and to be fair, this part is at least within character. He's furious because Homer being on life support is causing his healthcare plan $5,000 a day, and he demands that Homer dies with dignity.
Hey, I'm the doctor here.
Well, I demand a second opinion.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Dr. Nick.
I see no signs of life. Just to be safe, we better pull the plug.
I love that when he says there's no signs of life, though, he hits Homer in the stomach with a little hammer, and Homer actually, completely reacts. He, coughs and winces.
I just like that after Dr. Nick says that, Burns goes, yoink, like he's gonna pull the plug. Or he does.
No, he actually does, yeah.
Yeah. I just love Dr. Nick. I see no signs of life.
Marge is furious that Mr. Burns could be so heartless, but Mr. Burns recalls many times that Homer has been a pain in his rectum.
And this is their continuity issue right here, because why does Burns remember Homer this time, but not the 18,000 other times?
Yeah, exactly.
Who is that blubbering buffoon, Smithers? And I believe with the Burns flashbacks, the big one is Dog of Death, where Homer's asking Burns for money for Santa's Little Helper's operation.
Mr. Burns is mashing the release the hounds button and nothing's happening.
Yes.
Finally, Homer does have one last visitor. It's actually a scientist with an unorthodox idea to rescue Homer. It's Dr. Frink. And he wants to go on a fantastic voyage, one with 3 scientists, one of them being a beautiful woman, of course.
It's a perfect movie.
They're going to shrink down to a microscopic size and rendezvous in Homer's lower colon. The only problem is they're having trouble getting volunteers. Fun fact about this little bit, this is an instance of Simpsons Did It, and the it also being Simpsons, because they're going to reuse this idea again all the way in Season 16 for Treehouse of Horror 15, where they use this exact premise, only they're going inside Mr. Burns instead of Homer.
I was a little upset with myself when I saw Dr. Frank, because an idea popped in my head, and since this is a clip show, and we've been going back to our own episodes, I wanted to say, in our 50th episode, I don't remember if I included Dr. Frank in my Simpsons song. I would assume I would, because I love Dr. Frank, but for some reason it was just sticking in my head where I don't remember if I included him or not.
Damn, I don't either. It doesn't ring a bell, actually.
Everyone should go back and listen to the 50th episode and let us know.
I love our 50th episode. There's so many talented musicians in that show. I mean, just
thank you.
Back to listen to it for Emmy Bede and Chris Novembrino's songs alone are totally worth it, let alone hearing from all our awesome listeners and guests. But those songs are fucking killer.
Props to everybody.
Enough plugging our own show within our show. Yet another meta clip show within a clip show moment, though. We do get a few touching moments between Lisa and then, of course, Bart as well. Both the kids get an opportunity to sit down next to their father, and they reminisce about some moments that they've gotten to share together. Lisa is always a treat because they get that part in one of my favorite episodes from early on, One Fish, Two Fish, Blowfish, Bluefish, where Homer thinks he's dying. And I love just the idea that when Lisa's playing the saxophone for him, whatever tune she plays directly affects Homer's mood. So when she starts playing upbeat, he instantly gets happy and starts shouting about how the Saints march over there.
When the Saints go over there.
Over there! Over there!
And then we get the clip, which is one of our favorite openings to any Simpsons episode ever, if not our most favorite opening, where Bart's friend falls in love, which is the whole Indiana Jones opening with Bart in his red cap on,
the jar of pennies,
Homer's money.
Yeah, this is actually really touching too, because Bart is, again, they're trying to do a good job of making this have as much meaning as they can for a clip show. But Bart is talking about how he knows he hasn't always been a perfect kid, and he's starting to apologize for some of the things that he's done. And of course, we see some epic moments where Bart has done some of the cooler things that he's done, even if that is the reason that Homer has only 3 hairs.
Yeah, we get a couple clips of Bart stuff right here, don't we?
We do, yeah.
I think it was like 4 different clips. We got Bart's friend falls in love, Bart the General, where he's rolling down the hill in a trash can.
That one I had an issue with too, though, because he was talking about times where he had gotten in trouble, and in Bart the General, that was a scene where he was getting bullied.
Yeah, where Homer was trying to help him. I think they just wanted the father-son moments.
Yeah, they were going for touching Bart and Homer moments. Totally.
Yeah. But then we get the 3-minute in a comic book where Homer's supposed to check in on Bart and Milhouse and Martin in the treehouse, where he's in that room we always talk about.
I have to call myself out because I recently was talking about this layout on Twitter, and I could have sworn that shot was from an upstairs room, but it turns out that room with the beanbag chair is in fact in the downstairs room, not the upstairs room. So my bad on that. I got confused again. It's a little bit of a confusing layout.
Okay, that's that one where I was like, they have 5 rooms upstairs?
Yeah,
okay,
exactly. I was completely mistaken. That was the room, or that exact shot they used was the sequence I was thinking about, and I thought that was an upstairs room looking directly into the treehouse, but on this viewing I realized it's actually from the first floor looking up into the treehouse.
Get your Simpsons facts right. It's almost like you've never watched an episode.
I'm telling you, man. One of these days I'll try to actually sit down and watch one.
And it's not dough, it's do-o, just so you know.
It's Bort, right? Bort and Lisa?
Yeah, get your Bort license plates.
Throughout this touching moment between Bart and Homer, Bart starts to cry. He's actually genuinely upset, and he's sorry. He apologizes to Homer because it was his April Fool's joke, after all, that ended up causing him to go into the hospital to begin with.
And then the last scene after that one where Homer's looking up in the treehouse is from One Fish, Two Fish, Blowfish, Bluefish, where Homer's teaching Bart to shave on his list of things he wants to do before he dies.
So it sounds like the number 1 used episode for flashbacks was Lisa's Pony, immediately followed by One Fish, Two Fish, is what I'm gathering from these clips. Yeah. And all of these memories, I guess, are making Bart feel even worse. He actually starts to cry, and he is very, very upset because he realizes it's his fault. After all, it was his April Fool's Day joke that ended up putting Homer in the hospital to begin with. So he's upset, he's apologizing, and he's confessing to Homer right there while he's in a coma. But that confession was enough to trigger as much of a Simpsons reset as we're going to get for this episode. Homer wakes up out of his coma just so he can strangle Bart. We get this really great animation where we're actually choking Bart from Homer's perspective, which is not usually how they shoot that shot. It was kind of neat as he's coming up out of the bed. It was a fun animation design. Again, Homer is quite angry that Bart shook up his beer that caused all of this problems, but ultimately, everyone's healthy and happy and okay.
I like on the Heartline monitor, it actually shows this outline of Bart's head instead of like a straight or flat or up and down wavy line. As Homer's getting mad as he's coming out of the coma, it shows Bart's head over the images.
That was brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. The EKG is little Bart heads going by. But that's as much as is going to reset. Homer's out of the coma. Everyone's healthy and happy. Homer actually announces he's going to take the whole family to Hawaii to celebrate. Haha, April Fools.
Homer, it's May 16th. You've been in a coma for 7 weeks. You've lost 5% of your brain power.
Me lose brain? Uh-oh.
Why I laugh?
This is actually very similar to the ending they did last week in a lot of ways. It's everybody's laughing into the silliness. Last week it was with the laughing gas they used at the dentist. This week it's with Homer losing 5% of his already seemingly diminished brain power.
The only real clip we didn't discuss is a little bit earlier where they do a whole bunch of Homer saying dough and just dough.
Oh, I actually like that sequence. That was actually pretty cool.
Did you notice they reused almost all the doughs, it seemed like? I watched it 3 times and I caught there's the Radio Bart one that they reused that exact same shot in the same string of doughs. And they also did it where Homer's putting money in a candy machine and saying dough as well. So If you watch that segment, pay attention because they reuse multiple doughs.
But it's still a really cool sequence. I like how they do it. They just go through showing many of Homer's uses of the word.
Dope.
Exactly. That does bring us to the end of So It's Come to This, a Simpsons Clip Show. Rich, was there anything else that you or that book of yours wanted to talk about before we get on out of here?
I'm going to start with my guidebook here, The Simpsons, A Complete Guide to Our Favorite Family. It points out that during the sequence at the beginning where the Simpsons are depicted as pagans, the Lisa pagan does not participate in their ritual. And when I went back and watched this episode a second time, I saw it, and she's basically sitting cross-legged off to the side in this scene. So I thought that was a really funny differential thing to do with Lisa there.
That is funny.
It says, also, when Bart cranks up the temperature in the house to make Homer thirsty to go to the refrigerator, among the things that melt is a Leo Sawyer album from the late 1970s, because you see things in the house melting when Bart cranks up the temperature. And then the number of times Homer says dough in succession from various episodes, it put as 32. But
wow.
Again, I'm saying they reuse a lot of those little images, so I feel like that's a skewed number. And then the number of different episodes in which clips were utilized, aside from the doughs, was 14. Again, that number I feel like is skewed as well, because I counted the number of clips played was around like 19, I think. So there's a little cross-referencing, because some episodes have doughs and, like Lisa's Pony have multiple takes from it. So it's very confusing on the numbers on all the different clips they play. But just on a personal note, what I really enjoyed about this episode, aside from the things we've already discussed, is that there is a balance on the whole coma thing. Because Bart is the reason Homer went into the coma, and Bart is also the reason that Homer came out of the coma. So I thought that was a really interesting way of still being a Simpsons episode where they have that cleverness to it. And I just really, really enjoyed that.
Well, seeing as we know that Homer is an above-average beast, and you think that Bart is a beastmaster, couldn't Bart have just been keeping Homer down as an extended April's Fool prank this entire time?
Yeah, but Bart's the kind of guy that would want Homer to know that at the end.
Very true. Overall, what I want to say about this episode is I keep using the phrase for a clip show, and I feel like that's fair in a lot of ways, because this is a really good episode for a clip show. But I want to point out something that they mentioned on the commentary that really I kind of tripped on for a little while. I really got deep and thought about this for just a little bit of time, because I can remember back in time when this episode aired, there was no such thing as TV collections on DVD or VHS even. That was not a thing. Reruns were the only way you were going to catch old episodes of The Simpsons, and it wasn't like there was a cable channel dedicated to playing The Simpsons 24/7, so worst case scenario, you just gotta wait a few days and the episode you want to watch will be on. This was a time where episodes played, new episodes once a week when they are on, and reruns when they came out as available. So this was a very well-received episode. This is actually pretty highly rated. It's above a 7. I want to say it's a 7.2 on IMDb, which,
oh wow,
compare that to other clip shows from other shows, and I think you'll be surprised that it's still pretty high. But all in all, I remember back when I would watch episodes, like I think about like Boy Meets World and even Friends, that also would occasionally go to the clip show method. And at that time, I don't remember hating them or having that kind of like, clip show feeling that we have now. But now it's like the complete opposite. Not only do we have the DVD, VHS, well, VHSs are gone, but we have the DVD Blu-ray box sets. And even more, we've got the Netflix that we can put a lot of these shows on at any time and watch any episode that we want. So the idea of a clip show seems silly in today's world, but at that time, it was actually a pretty clever idea, something that a lot of sitcoms use, but they could be well done like this one was, so that they didn't feel repetitive and tedious. They actually felt refreshing and funny, because you were just getting to revisit episodes of a show that you love that you otherwise wouldn't have an opportunity to visit. A lot of people will hate on this episode because it's a clip show, but I think if we keep it in perspective, it makes sense why it's rated what it's rated.
It was a lot of fun, man. Like, it was much more entertaining than I thought it was going to be. And it made me think that I did not learn clip shows were a bad thing until the Simpsons started making fun of themselves for doing clip shows. Like, as a kid, you're like, oh, yay, and you're remembering all these instances. But it's the Simpsons that put that idea in my head as a child where clip shows were a bad thing.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. They make fun of it even further with South Park, I know, when they do a clip show that actually flashes back to things that were never part of the show, which is even another funny joke on the clip show thing, another way to keep it fresh.
That's what I call a sticky situation.
All in all, I think this is a pretty damn good episode for a clip show. And on that note, let's get on out of here. Rich, what do you want to plug this week?
As always, you can follow me on Twitter. I'm at theWizKid23. Also, while you're on Twitter, give our show a follow as well. That's at bestdarndiddly. That's DIDDLY.
I am at MrMostDaysOff pretty much everywhere online. You can also keep up with our show, the Best Darn Diddly Review Show, at bestdarndiddly.com. We're available on iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, Pod Paradise, and wherever you listen to your podcast. In addition to the Twitter handle at bestdarndiddly, you can also write us at bestdarndiddly@gmail.com. And once again, I just want to thank everyone so much for listening to the Best Darn Diddly Review Show. The WizKid and I look forward to being back again with you next week when we review The Front.
And remember, when your sponsors ask you, it's alcohol that causes rectal cancer, not beer.
Until next time, be cromulent to each other.
Writers are strange and lonely people. We tend to be trapped in our heads, thinking of characters, coming up with voices, setting scenes. It's a lonely, depressing lifestyle. I mean, some of us drink. Others put a shotgun in their mouth. Whatever it may be, writers need some type of outlet. And that's why Daniel Ford and I got together and created the Writer's Bone podcast to help writers and to keep them out of situations like an insane asylum or painting a wall with their brain matter.
You can subscribe to Writer's Bone on iTunes, Google Play, and SoundCloud. Head over to writersbone.com to check out our original fiction, essays, boneyard discussions, and more. And in the meantime, all you writers out there, and hell, all you non-writers out there, keep writing.